That is football. That is design. That is truly why, like, I have a feeling that Lester is going to be a tough guy to hold on to, and he might be a head coach one day, is because that was elite.
Welcome back to the ANF Podcast, where we cover Iowa sports.
Today we're going to do a breakdown of the Iowa-Illinois State game and then move into a preview for the Iowa State game.
In our first breakdown, it feels like in a lot of episodes, we're actually going to focus on the offense and the offense execution and the new scheme. Generally, when we do these episodes and do these breakdowns, we're focused on the defensive plays and the defensive personnel, but now it seems like an equal balance of breaking down both offense and defense.
Yeah, where do you want to start with? I think we could break down the big plays. I think that's the quickest way in. I know you wanted to talk about the Caleb Johnson one off the bat.
Yeah, I think there's like 5 or 6 plays that really stand out. And our previous episode, we discussed of things we wanted to see. Things like, all right, it's Lester's first game of his era. What's his scheme look like?
What's his idea of the
play
offense?
Calling? Yeah, what's his idea of the offense? How is he going to use the personnel? How is he going to be creative? And, you know, what's the overall idea of how he's going to play? And it is just a modern pro style. And I kind of question that. You know, you hear 49ers, Rams, Packers, and like, what is it actually going to look like? But the first play I want to call out, and it really, that was a point of like, this is actually a scheme that I'm excited to watch develop for the next, 12 games of this regular season, is the Caleb Johnson 50-yard touchdown run. Because you see that all the time on Sunday. It's a pitch play to the left, and it's, we actually ran a lot of similar actions last year to Johnson. It's a pin and pull concept where, tight end, maybe receiver crash down, trying to set the edge, hard edge, and you're pulling guards, and you're trying to get Caleb to, D and to the sideline gap. And it's a scary play. Like generally that core play of Caleb to the edge.
If you're not quick to it, it's a real problem.
It's a real problem. And what this play is, the touchdown run is it's a pitch, but it's actually a run to B gap between guard and tackle. And the design of it instantly influenced the entire defense. Like you kind of get a back view of it on the highlight. You see the D end. He sees the pitch. He sees Caleb. He goes, edge. I got to set the edge. And he just turns and sprints. Linebacker turns his head and sprints. And both those guys just get washed with it because actually we're not blocking them to set the edge. We're blocking them. They're going right where we want them. And so it's when you're talking about scheme, like ability, if you can influence defenders by the first second of a play and have them gap themselves out, that's exactly what offensive schemes are supposed to do. You're supposed to influence defenders away from where you actually want them to go. And that's where, you see that play and the result, and it used Caleb in space. It seemed like the fruition of almost all of our preseason discussion of what do we want to see.
Yeah, they utilized Caleb in a number of ways, and I liked all of it. You saw the outside zone out of shotgun where he could come at the corner with pace, had a one-on-one with the cornerback, beat him for a touchdown. That looked just like a high-level running back play. It's what you see out of like SEC backs, where they just get to the second level and they're just the better player. Overall, I think the first formation I want to break down is that tight 2x2 formation under center. And you saw almost Iowa's entire scheme start at that position. You saw a lot of motion out of it. You saw ways to widen it, to shorten it. There's about 3 or 4 different things that make it really effective that I want to go into right now. The first is getting our X receivers, our tight receivers, to that 10-yard window in the zone, in that second level zone, faster than we have in the past. Mm-hmm. So most of the time when you have receivers playing out wide, there's a 10-yard dig that's a part of almost every single zone concept because you have action underneath the linebackers. You usually have action that carries safeties deep, and then you have this kind of delayed route over the middle that takes a long time. It's usually a pretty long throw.
Yeah.
That area is now easily attacked through what we saw with Vanderzee, where one of the first routes he ran was one of those in-breaking routes at 10 to 12 yards. Cade hit it between 2 windows. It's a tough throw. It's a ballsy throw. But when you have a 6'4" target, that one becomes a very sustainable and successful and efficient move. Also, out of that system, you are inherently, what I saw out of every system was, or every formation and play out of it was, you are constantly putting pressure on the seam. And where we struggled in the prior administration horribly was to put pressure on the seam, to really even see that as an option of attack. Mm-hmm. Brian was afraid. You think about the seam shot against Northwestern in 2020. Mm-hmm. Petrus lost the game on that shot. Ball sailed high. I think after that, he really sacrificed that.
A lot of quarterbacks couldn't make that throw.
Yeah.
Stanley and Petrus both sailed throws over the middle a lot.
When you have that leverage, now those linebackers who are about 7 or 8 yards That's a lot of pressure on them. They have to carry that. You saw Lachey get over the top of them once for that about 12-yard catch. And then we ran that same play with a screen underneath. Talk about marrying together. That was a beautiful combo. Lachey in the first quarter got up the seam on him. If K doesn't have a little bit of pressure in his face and doesn't throw off his back foot, that's a touchdown. Like that seam is a real threat within the system. And I think it's the quickest way to really start to attack zone schemes aggressively and not just play this, basic pansy style football, which we saw for the better part of 4 years. The next piece of it is then how we isolated flat defenders. So when you are in that reduced set, the corner and the flat defender on the short side of the field zone or even the wide side of the field zone, they have all their pressure behind them and outside them. So if you have a receiver tight to the left, tight end, and then a running back on that side, his fearful route is that flat route at full speed because he's given up 7-8 more yards of space than he usually would. He's usually bastarded out against a slot receiver. Now that comes a lot faster and that's a lot scarier. So then what we did in short yardage is you would smash that flat route and had that slant to Gill that he got popped on. You had other action that would carry it deep, and they just manipulated the crap out of the flat defender, which is by far the weakest position of any zone. If you can manipulate the flat defender, you have a lot of easy passes, a lot of easy completions, the way to stay on schedule, and that was fantastic. Other than that, I think we can go into some other plays. Do you have another one you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think the beginning of the second half, the first drive, when we started to get our rhythm as an offense, and truly, if you could, everyone says second half adjustments. I think it's kind of it's not consistent for every game that second half adjustments win games, but you could see it like there was an evolution of the first half plays and the second half plays. The second half plays really built off the first half plays. And we talked in the preview saying, one aspect of play calling that really frustrates, viewers that are following it closely is, if you see a repeated play that we've ran in the past and you can kind of predict where it's going. Because the defense and the defensive coordinator are even thinking harder about it than you are. They're in the moment. They're seeing the body language and all that. And there was a play, it was a 3rd and 3 on their, I want to say 20-yard line. And we came out in 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 1 running back. We shifted instantly to a 5 wide, which is what, it's not a crazy thing to do. It's what we did last year even a lot. And what you're doing is you're requiring the defense to put 3 defensive tackles on the field and 4 linebackers. And so you actually have 5 kind of true defensive linemen, but you're throwing out a 5 wide set. So now you're already on the front foot. You've kind of put them in the scheme issue where they're in a 5 wide set. They're going to base out generally. And now you're going to isolate one player. You're going to isolate your slot receiver. You're going to isolate your tight end because they're going to be going against linebackers and because there's just more linebackers on the field. And I was like, all right, well, here's the stick route that we saw in the first half and the 3rd and 6 to Lachey. It's, you're on the front foot. You're in the correct set here to run this. You're in the correct play to attack a linebacker with Lachey. And I thought that's what was coming. But Lachey broke out. I'm like, there's the stick. And then he cut up. And when he cut up, I went, oh. And it gained 15 yards, and he was wide open. And that was like the start of the second half when you start stacking these plays together of like, oh, let's go. All right, we got something here. Cade starts rolling, like Lester starts feeling that confidence. That was the first time where it was like a double, it was the first counterpunch that you were anticipating them playing football. Like that linebacker's going, I'm getting 5 wided. I've seen this exact look. It's going to be the stick. I'm on the couch going, it's going to be the stick. And then it wasn't the stick. It was like, yes,
you caught him in a moment of comfort where he thought I'm going to guess this right. I'm going to bait him. I'm going to give him a little bit of ground. But when he makes that first cut, I'm going to make that first cut a little faster. Yeah. And that's that. When you can get a guy guessing and you can set that hook, that's where big plays occur. That's where scheme, turns the tides. Exact same scenario. I mean, this is probably my favorite call of the day. I think it goes down as maybe my favorite call I've, broke down in 10 years is the Jacob Gill touchdown. He has this half motion with, I can't think of his name now. TJD. We're not TJD. Terrell Washington Jr. Yeah. And it's just like this sneaky little half motion, breaks back out to the flats. He has Cade with a quick play action, same motion to the right, dragging everyone to the right. He runs Gill on this like inside breaking eventual corner route. The safety he ends up getting manned up on is seeing this as your typical play action 2 levels concept outside the numbers, and he relaxes. He thinks, okay, my outside corner is going to eventually carry this outside breaking route. I'm almost not even useful in this play. Gill then breaks it back the opposite way, very, quasi like related to that Reganey or Ragaini play against Penn State, where it's that same concept of motion right. Everyone's feeling play action right. We break it back left. Cade then throws the perfect pass, lines it so he can get it over the backside left safety who's playing Vanderzee underneath, and then the play side safety is just too far behind. And then, that was a 4-high cover 4 look, and they hit an inside post route with one deep receiver. That is football. That is design. That is truly why, I have a feeling that Lester is going to be a tough guy to hold on to, and he might be a head coach one day, is because that was elite. And granted, he's a new OC. He's breaking out these concepts for the first time. This is a giant benefit to have a very old O-line, very old QB, very succinct team that's all been around each other for a long time with new plays. He gets to break out every trick he has for the next 12 games, and that's going to be a huge advantage.
Yeah. I think we just talked about scheme and all the qualities of each play, but what he did the best too is just putting our best players in space and putting them in great situations. I think what he did actually the best was he called the game for Cade perfectly. If you go back to our offensive breakdown, we drafted Cade second overall on the team, and we really want him to play point guard. Just let him focus on his strengths. And the entire game plan just played to Cade's ability. Even put him in shotgun is where he really thrives, because he can just read the defense and see everything. He's 24 years old. He's played a lot of football. He's been playing high-level football for, since he's probably been a freshman in high school and thinking about the game critically. And it just showed in this game. Accuracy over the middle. That is our one thing that we love about Cade the most. Fitting windows and having the confidence to throw them. That seam shot to Lachey in the end of the, second quarter to kind of get us down to, kicking a field goal, he put it on his back shoulder. You have a safety coming up the top. You got to fit a window. He's not just throwing the ball to have him catch it. He's putting it on his back shoulder.
To
protect him 20 yards downfield. Those are the type of throws where you're Cade was pretty shaky early in the game, but once he hit that throw and had a scramble, you could see the confidence start to flow again. And that second half, I almost tweeted out, I feel 7 plays, 75 yards. That was my feeling coming out. And the rest of the half was just him rolling on that quick decision-making, quick release, really understanding what he's seen almost every play. And I don't think we watched him be confused by one look the entire game. He always knew where he was going with it. It was just the execution and kind of the nerves early in the first half.
Well, I think a perfect example of where Cade's at mentally and where he got to in that game confidence-wise was the fadeaway touchdown. So this is another scheme breakdown, but it was a pick and roll with a basketball player in Vanderzee. You had essentially a pick play where Vanderzee came out at 10 yards, ran a curl, and sat down, and that's a very common word. Then you'll run a wheel route off that, and that's what Lachey was on. And they're trying to catch a pick. At the snap, we have a blitz from depth where Cade catches the blitz, knows that now he's in a cover 3 look. So this is called for cover 3. You're trying to catch this. I've never seen a call like it. This is, again, incredible creative design where you're having a guy delay a seam shot, and then it's also going to be a pop ball. Cade, the only reason Cade threw it because he knew that's what ball was going to be required no matter what.
Yeah.
And the free safety was too late to it. But it came out chaotic, but it just showed he saw the blitz coming. He knew what he was going to throw. He was going to turn and fall. He does that all the time where he'll, essentially start going down before he throws. And that is the combination of that Lester design with Cade's confidence and just belief in what he can do. We might see a very, very prolific year from Cade.
All we need from Cade, and we said this in the breakdown too, is you need him to be point guard. And it just was a point guard game from him. And also he made a few, extra plays. He had the scramble out where he, made the play on the run. It was a hell of a throw. And honestly, I didn't see him do that in Michigan. This is 24-year-old Cade. He last played in 2021. He's a lot younger, not as strong in his eyes. We can even get another step up from him. So I think, I tweeted out, before the season started, third team All Big Ten, All Big Ten is on the table, in my belief. And that first game showed that. I think now it's time to talk even more about the personnel of the weapons he's throwing to. I think to see Gill developed, I think we obviously have to talk about RVZ, Reese Vanderzee, as well as Ortworth, developed into, looks like he's going to play a lot this year and be in a lot of concepts where they're trying to target him. It seems like Iowa actually has, more weapons than we anticipated in the first game, and they kind of all had their moments of like making plays.
Well, that's what's just so crazy about it is we talked about a rebranding where receivers need to be a focus of this team. You go to the box score, and Gill and Vanderzee are 1-3 for yards, touchdowns, catches. Like those are two guys who are playing their first game for Iowa, and he came out and designed a game plan around them where they weren't. Northwestern didn't really use Gill that much. Mm-hmm. He struggled to get on the field at that place. Vanderzee wasn't some super big recruit. Like was a middling 3-star with some Midwest offers. To be able to go out and have a high function offense with those two guys, you really start to think about like, okay, 2-3 years down the road, you start bringing in some big time recruits. You get some big transfers. What can Lester create in the receiver room here that eventually attracts quarterbacks and builds everything else up? But I don't want to get away from the personnel talk because the guy you could talk about Reese Vanderzee, and I think we could talk about how we messed up his recruiting profile a bit, and I think it's the typical bias that applies to small town Iowa. But Ortworth was so impressive to me in this game. Granted, he made like the play of the game with the over the shoulder catch, plucked it out of the air, like looked great. Where he really stepped up for me was his blocking prowess. Mm-hmm. They whammed him a couple times where he exploded through people. He has that kind of bend, that froggy look to him that Hawkinson has. And I think having this, he's undersized. He's like 6'3", 240. But having this undersized kind of quasi fullback, wham back, then also you feel comfortable with him out of the backfield, catching space. Passes in space. He's going to be a really important piece as this year develops, especially if you have an injury at the tight end room.
Yeah, and to have your third tight end be playable and have him make plays, like that's just huge for the room. Mm-hmm. But going into Reese, I think obviously we drafted him 9th in our recruiting breakdown, and I can say I take personal responsibility for him being drafted that late. Having him be a quarterback his senior year, it was hard to evaluate his film as much. He's not naturally going through the same breaks out of a 15-yard dig. How many times is he a high point as a senior? I'm guessing he matured, even got better as a senior as well. He obviously played receiver as a junior, but he could have even looked different as a senior on film. But I think where I actually messed up the most was I should have just turned on the basketball film. I watched that today and I was like, oh. And we haven't evaluated the X receiver in years at Iowa. I think Brandon Smith is the first last true X receiver we had where he plays kind of more like a tight end. Like those guys are just big body guys, and where they actually separate themselves is just strength at the top of routes, making contested catches, leaping, 36 inches, which I think RVZ has that type of leaps watching his basketball film. So it's just a different evaluation. But now when you kind of go back and watch his film and you see all the subtlety he has, I think Iowa has their guy for 4 years here at receiver where, talking about a receiver to pair with Cade as well, like Cade over the middle throws and a guy that, seems like a big body that has good hands and can leap. Like this is not a one game thing for him. It's going to be a consistent part of our game plan of, probably 6 to 7 targets a game if we're going to a receiver. And now you add Caleb Brown to that aspect where Lester did such a good job of getting our best players on our best plays and using them in creative ways. I am very excited to how he's going to use Caleb Brown this next game because Caleb Brown only had about a half step from Brian's design last year. He was always just that stick play open, where he's kind of open. We got him in a good spot, not a great spot. We got him on a bubble screen. We got him on a reverse jet sweep. He's still making plays in that situation, but he's not in a true, I have a full step. And if you watch Caleb Brown's high school film and you just understand how good of an athlete he is, if Lester can put him in space, like Caleb Johnson can flash, so can he. And he'll do it differently. He'll go laterally and he'll be able to, get a safety in a two-way moment and he'll be able to juke him out. And I think that's, start thinking about this entire offensive weapon personnel we have, adding a gadgety guy like him to seems like we have 2 true receivers that can run routes that can Cade can find. There's a full bevy of plays for Lester to call because he has guys to throw to that he can trust to put in good situations. They'll make plays.
Yeah, we attack the entire field, and it's only going to become I think the last thing that we needed to add was the screen game, the wide receiver screen game, because that's how you stop blitzes from deep late over C-gap. If you're going to have a safety come off the edge, which is essentially how Illinois attacked us the entire game, was just blitzing from depth. It's why it looked so ugly early, is they were really timing us up when we were under center, and our run game was just falling apart because you either had a guy coming off C-gap at full speed once it was snapped, or a linebacker coming through blowing up our power. But we even talked about RPO yet. But RPO late in the game, our RVZ's first catch was an RPO action. We've talked about in the past. It was a violation. Colby was 2.5 to 3 yards downfield, but they don't call it. So you have to use it. If they're going to allow this, as Pat Fitzgerald called, like communist system around RPO, you have to utilize it. And we saw a blitz from deep get exposed where all of a sudden RVZ's on a deep slant and there's an ocean of space. And that was just another great addition from Lester.
I think it's time to move on to the defense.
Yeah.
Right down to Iowa State.
We are thrilled to announce a new sponsor of the ANF Podcast. Next time you're looking for an all-inclusive beach vacation, consider Via Puesta del Sol or Via Puerto Escondido, both of which overlook the Pacific Ocean in Ocotal, Costa Rica, providing an exceptional all-inclusive experience for your family and friends. Visit their website, linked down below, for more information or to reserve your trip today.
I think you have to start the defensive line in Aaron Graves. We've been waiting for this Aaron Graves for a long time. And he's shown flashes of it. He was a great player last year, even as a freshman. You go back to the 2022 Purdue game. He made like 3 plays in that game, and you can kind of see it coming. And obviously his recruiting film was insane. But it seems like he's hit that point of fruition where, he was talking trash after plays. Usually a pretty, celebrates, but starting to bark like, I know I'm unblockable. I know I'm the best player on this field. And to have that, a guy who's kind of fully realized himself in the middle of your defense, surrounded by also a defensive line that was one of the best defensive line games I've seen in Iowa. Iowa's defensive line since 2018 has been incredible. Like
Top 5 in the country for
the recruiting, the development, the depth. We haven't missed on a D-line guy in years. And it's just another year of that, but there's some real demons coming off the bench. And the starting 4, like their run stopping ability is insane. And I think we're not going to just talk about Iowa's defensive line as this is a good, like a top 5 defensive line room in the country. We're going to start comparing the defensive line room this year to nationally good rooms. You're talking about Ohio State receivers. You're talking about, Notre Dame secondary. Iowa's defensive line this year is going to start sniffing those comparisons, not as like every guy's first round, second round, but there's like 5 guys, 6 guys right now that are juniors that are all going to be on a roster trying to make the final cuts in the NFL room. Like that doesn't happen.
I think not only that, there's also 3, fairly high level guys that will be drafted.
Yeah.
You talk about Graves, the guy who flashed. We've been waiting for so long for this. And you could tell on that first sack, he also had been waiting too. Just a giant celebration. But Brian Allen hit the guy with I haven't seen a lot of Iowa defense ends employ this move, but he hit him with like a hezzy to start and then completely beat him.
Long-armed him. Yeah.
Long-armed him. And it was one of the cleanest reps I've seen at the end. That's essentially like scoring like an 80-yard touchdown for a D-end if you hit that move. That is going to be a real problem.
Yeah.
Because I think
then Black is a third guy, right, for NFL?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see what we really wanted was for a pass rush to develop. We were talking about Brian Allen potentially being that guy in the defensive draft. I think we took him like 7th or 8th, like under the guys that he's going to be an interior defensive end rusher, which we saw on the first third down rep is they play him inside and they run twist with him. They can sweep him, do all that kind of stuff. But then having a true, edge rusher that can come off the blind side and end the QB's day. Like adding that to this defense, like that hasn't been a part of this team for 2 years. Like we haven't had that dominant edge rusher.
Yeah.
Van Ness didn't really even have that senior year or junior year should have had.
Yeah.
Or that we want him to have. This guy could be that next step.
If you would have stayed one more year, most likely he would have. Yeah. I think what it comes down to is just the D-line is, you generally, your backups aren't Llewellyn and Brian Allen. Like that is when you're like breaking down the depth chart going into the year, you don't have Llewellyn in his 4th year and Brian Allen on no Big Ten roster. You don't have that on Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa State. You don't have these guys just sitting. And that's why this room is elevated. The starters might not be the flashiest, Georgia or whatever and Alabama, but those 2 DNs just sitting there, really highly recruited guys. Every Midwest team wanted them. And now they're both upperclassmen and they get to play 20 snaps a game, coming in completely fresh. And that's what really elevates this room to being, one of the nation's best in any offense or defense.
Well, and the starting DNs are both technically sound, humble guys.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be what separates this team and why this defense is going to be so consistent again. is those guys just play the scheme. You know, they're not meant to be the heroes of the defense. They're not high TFL guys. And that's, for a reason. They're trying to lock out and create a wall.
Yeah.
And now, if those 4 guys, if they could do that and just let everyone else play fast behind them, that is such a good tackling speed team.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to get to the point where I'm not going to have a touchdown before Ohio State. What I've seen from Iowa State last year, unless it's a jump ball to Higgins, what I've seen from Minnesota early on, it's going to be a really difficult time executing inside the 30 for both those teams.
Yeah. I think it's time to break down the Iowa State game. I think we'll start on the Iowa State defense when we're on offense. Obviously, it's still the same scheme as last year and what they've ran since 2018. A 3-3-5 allows them to essentially call more of a guessing game as a coordinator. It allows them to obviously drop 8 when they were required to and play 3-down rushing linemen, or try to gap you out and blitz run play. So if you are predictable, if he does get your cadence, the defense coordinator does, he has the ability to put you in disadvantages at the snap of a ball. If he feels like a 3rd and 1's coming and he can blitz 8 guys and gap out every run hole you could be in, you're gonna be in trouble. And if he has a passing play that you're in a 2nd and 3 and you kind of want to step back and throw, and he plays you 8 deep, you have to be ready. They put you in a horrible position when they do that.
Yeah, that's kind of the whole reason for the defense is if you can trick a team into throwing the ball when you can drop 8, because then you just get put into this very awkward position where your QB has to operate off schedule or just check down. Sometimes you can have those drop 8s where guys are playing really hard underneath. You can get a pick, you can get a hit on collision. It's just a very difficult scheme to play against unless you have a power run game. I think where it falls apart for them against Iowa, but where Iowa was effective last year was runs out of our heavy formation and then counters off that where you got Lachey at the seam. You were able to use play action to Eric All several times. I actually think we're going to attack them a little bit differently this year. I think if we can somehow get Caleb Johnson to the edge and create that edge pressure, I think that's how Tim Lester really wants to play this lighter box. Is essentially the same way that we were able to exploit that one sweep, where if you can start creating pressure to the edge, eventually those counters and bend backs to the middle, where we're going to have a very significant advantage, guard, center, guard, tackle, and tackle against their DNs, trying to influence action outside to end up inside is where we can really take the next step. I'm really excited to see how he attacks it in the passing game. When you have 8 to 7 guys dropping, especially with those 3 high safety looks, it's kind of counterintuitive because you do want to take deep shots against it because you're going to have such a long time as a QB. You're not going to most likely experience any pressure. Where they're trying to action their defensive line is when you scramble and you extend plays. That's where they can get you. But I'm really interested to see how Lester can at first play underneath those high safeties where they can start having to think about coming down, where at 10 to 15 yards, do you have that deep end working? Do you have deep curls? Do you have stuff like that to start drawing those safeties down? And then when will that counter come over the top? And, we might not see a lot of that. We might see a fairly passive attack from Lester early and maybe the whole game if the run game is there, just because it's very difficult to get over the top when they are playing such a passive set.
Yeah.
And a lot of the attacks have to be at that flat. And I'm really excited to see how he attacks the flat again, too, because that's a huge piece to beating these Iowa State teams is how can you isolate your tight ends.
And I definitely understand from the scheme, but I think just from their personnel, like watching their game against North Dakota, they're not going to trust their front 6. Like North Dakota had an ability to run the ball. They were really passive. They never really blitzed. They stayed in their umbrella look the entire time. They sat back and really allowed North Dakota just to do what they wanted to do between the 20s. And they had a 20-play drive. They were 11 of 15 on third downs in a portion of the game, and they weren't aggressive. They said, "You're not going to score in the red zone. We're already up, 7-0 almost instantly in the game," and they just played to win the game. And it made them look like they weren't that talented of a defense. But with the issue with their linebackers this year, where they already have a massive injury at middle linebacker. The rest of their linebacker personnel, it just isn't what it usually is. And it was the same thing we said last year going into this game. Their front 6 is not, when they were great and they had a really strong defense, it's just not it's not to the standard of Iowa
Will
State.
McDonald's not on the field.
Exactly. Mike Rose is not at linebacker.
Yeah.
And when you don't have a strong front 6 that can kind of flash and make plays, they're not going to die by a million cuts because they will. So they're not going to play this umbrella defense. They will sell out. Like, if they're circling their strengths of this team, they're not going to put their linebackers in D-line and just say, hope you guys can stop the run. They're going to play aggressive. So I think what this actually will turn out to be is a boom or bust type of game. I think there's going to be moments where Lester just gets called. It just happens as a coordinator in this type of scheme where they can really sell out to stop you. It happens. But you also have the opportunity to be explosive. And we saw it last year in this exact same, type of mentality. We would go for 2, and then we would have a Patterson go for 60 yards on a run. We went for 3, 4, and then Lachey hit a 60-yard, play action bomb. I see a very similar game in this sense when we're on offense, that it's going to be, we might just keep on like, oh, we're going to play numbers game. But in the second half, similar to last week, where you can actually kind of have that counter moment, and Iowa State will have to sell out to stop the run. They're not going to just be able to sit back and go 6-on-7. They don't have the personnel this year, as well as they don't have a pass rush. Like we're 110th in pass rush last year, or around that number, and didn't add any bodies that are going to make a difference. It feels like we're going to be very comfortable if they play base defense. So I think they're going
to wear down over time, and that's a real fear when you play a heavy set team. If you just let them punch you in the mouth 35 times before the fourth quarter, then you really start seeing 6-7 yard gains every play,
exactly.
A couple 30-yard bops.
So I think they will be aggressive. I don't see them playing nearly as passive as they did against North Dakota.
Yeah, and I think that's where one critique we had early, and they kind of worked out later. I talked about Cade, discovering that blitz from deep, is our under center run game. I feel like we're very just eager. If we get to the line and we have the numbers we want, we just hike it. Mm-hmm. We're trying to go as fast as possible. We're not going to let them roll down late. We're not going to let them adjust to the set. We just go. And I think that Cade is very good out of shotgun at discovery. He knows how to action his clap. You can see it coming. It's more of a comfortable ability. It's what they did at Michigan a lot with him. When he's under center, I think he needs to work in his snap count. How can he add in a dimension of that? How can he discover that blitz from deep? Because that's really what kills this scheme. Is if you let guys time up blitzes off C gap, you're going to turn your back to them on play action. You're going to have your running back run away from at full speed to start a play. Whatever that front side action looks like, we saw Miami, Ohio getting blocked up a lot on outside zone in those early plays, but it didn't matter because you had pace coming off the edge. The big improvement where I think the game's going to really lies, how well do we defend our edge? Another issue I had was we weren't really defending our edge. We didn't really have a lot of cuts. We didn't have a lot of even action off it to protect that edge. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another addition we'll see from Lester in this next game. And I think it might be something he's hiding. I think it's something that we're going to adjust too late, but that's going to be just the critical piece. Is like you mentioned, do we get caught when we get caught?
Yeah.
Or are we being timed up?
Yeah. I think one of the key personnel strengths we actually have in this game, we haven't had in past years. Obviously, Cade played last year, but he's healthy this year. Is that when they do drop 8 and they do only rush 3 guys. I remember watching you and I versus Iowa State. I can't remember how many years back it was, but you and I had this really scatty quarterback that just extended plays. And you and I think, ended up playing him tough. I don't know if it came down to a fumble. I think Breece Hall fumbled on the 2-yard line and Purdy had to recover it. It was some great game that they played, but it never was on time. The entire game for you and I's offense was never in sync. It never was,
ball
quick
out.
hitting, passing moments. What the run game didn't work, but this QB just extended plays, scrambled, and found receivers. Because when you rush 3, it's really hard to get to the passer, especially with the personnel they have at defensive line. They don't really have this, there's no bendy guy on the entire defensive line that can win a one-on-one easily. So Cade's going to have the ability, and it plays to his strengths. You think about 2021 Cade and watching back his film, the one thing he did the best was, and we go back to the point guard and the kind of the basketball reference, is run the 3-on-2 fast break, where all of a sudden the play breaks down. You got a guy, on the sideline, a receiver maybe that came back on a curl, and a tight end sitting in the middle of the field, maybe a running back. And guys are starting to hug their players because it zones and eventually matching up, 3 or 4 seconds into a play. Cade does a great job of extending a play with the idea to throw. So if he feels like I got 2 flat defenders or 2 kind of close defenders to the line of scrimmage here, and I got 2 guys, now I'm on a 3v2 fast break. So if I extend myself and I start essentially pushing, driving the ball to the rim and looking like I'm a scramble, one of these guys is coming off. They're not going to let me get to the rim. They're not going to let me scramble for a first down. So he has not just reading the pass rush, he's reading the coverage guys and their reaction to his movements. And then he'll play, if he's essentially going to scramble and a defender comes off the corner 3, essentially, he'll kick it out. And that's what he does so well. And I think there was going to be at least 2 or 3 opportunities where they've rushed 3. You better get the ball quickly because now you're 8v5 in the passing game. Or I think Cade will then realize, all right, now I have time and now I can play this kind of basketball type of formation, on a 3rd and 4, multiple times.
Yeah, it's going to be, I honestly think about Vanderzee within this system too. You talked about getting to that 10 to 12 yard mark where you're crossing laterally and you're pulling the safeties down, you get behind the linebackers. That's where he's so big in this game. Having that true X receiver, we're going to see a new type of pass like unlocked for Iowa. We haven't been able to exploit that area because we didn't have that athletic guy who could go get the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't had that against Iowa State. And I think that's where he could have a gigantic game where he can go, find the hole in the zone and post up.
We'll have success. I don't see this defense shutting us out. I don't see them. They just don't have the personnel that, you have Cooper obviously, but there's not a lot of guys that flash on this team. And with that front 6, I think we're going to be comfortable pretty much the entire game.
They're going to play hard. And That's where the advantage is. If they can start, being on the front foot themselves, we talk about maybe having a very good defensive scheme. If they're timing us up, if Leicester's, struggling in that facet, they can stay in the game just because the motion's going to be high for them.
Yeah.
And they play hard.
100%.
Like this is going to be...
They're a smart team.
They're a smart team.
And they recruit the right guys. They're recruiting guys that fit into this scheme. They build everyone huge.
We have a ton of respect for the Iowa State program.
Yeah.
It's a lot like Minnesota. We hate both programs. We don't want to lose. We want to beat them more than anyone else. But when they're playing other teams, we see what they do well.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of similarities.
Yeah. So I think it's time to move on to the offensive side of the ball for
Iowa State.
Yeah.
We are happy to announce a new sponsor for the ANF Podcast. The ANF Podcast is sponsored by Eye Surgeons Associates, proudly serving Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois for all your eye care needs for over 40 years.
Well, they have the same personnel, and we think they're going to attack us in a very similar manner. Isolations of Brahmer on Fisher, trying to get him in man-to-man out routes. Mm-hmm. He's a really good target. Fisher's a little undersized. Brahmer's really athletic. That worked for them, was pretty consistent for them. Noel working at the seam. I saw more seam shots than I saw in the past from Iowa State. I think that might be a priority for them because it looks like a ball Beck throws pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you're going to be playing zone, the seam is where you have to live at some point. That's really the throw that everyone's trying to make you throw because the potential for pick is high. But if you can have that higher wire act, that's where I can see them having more success they did in the past than last year. And then Higgins with the deep ball. Having not Deshaun Lee this year, but TJ Hall, that's a 4-inch height difference. Mm-hmm. Hall was a thicker guy, but I think TJ and Jabari on Higgins is actually where this game is going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
When they get to that 40-yard mark, even maybe sometimes when they get to the 25-20, you're going to see a ton of jump ball go to Higgins. I think that's where they have their only advantage. It's a one-on-one ball, and he's their best player.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's where they attack. If you look at one strength of this team, I think Higgins is probably the best player on both sides of the ball. I don't see an offensive line versus defensive line advantage. Obviously, we talked about the defensive line a lot. I don't see them running the ball for more than 80 yards, and that could be on 20, 22 carries. I don't see Higgins, Noel, Brahmer, Sama as home run threats. Like, for sure, Noel and Higgins, they're both really smooth athletes. They are super synced up with Beck. Beck and them have, they're on the same page every time you see them connect. It's like break, ball out, accurate, make a play. I think there were 15 of 15 of targets at one point in the North Dakota game. But none of those guys are burners. Like Noel, you'd expect to be at like 5'10", but when he gets the ball in his hands, he doesn't have that next gear. Higgins doesn't have that like freaky deer athlete to stretch.
I'm going to go over the top on you.
I'm over the top of you. So they don't have anyone on the team that can do that. Then you break down their O-line, D-line, they're going to be out of shotgun pretty much 90% of their plays, maybe even more. Not a lot of concepts you can run out of shotgun. Inside zone, maybe power counter, maybe a sweep, maybe a pitch play, maybe a jet sweep. It's kind of got to all go into the defense line anyways. And they're kind of know where the ball's going, and Phil can get creative with slants. The run game is not going to be, digging into us, getting 6 yards, 7 yards a play. So if you have both aspects to that game plan where your run game is not, we're not dropping an eighth guy in the box going, we got to go to cover 3 here and stop this run. Crap, we got to go to cover 4. We got to get depth of 8 yards and have our guys pedaling in the moment the ball snaps so we don't get beat deep by this freaky deep route receiver. That's kind of the core elements of offense. If you can't hurt them with the run and you can't freak them out with the deep ball, you got to execute a shit ton. You have to execute over the middle of the field, and you have to do it on third down 6 or 7 times in one drive if you want to score against his defense. So it really allows Phil to play his game. If you're going to target the middle of the field and you're going to do it against this type of scheme with these type of players and the intelligence that this back seven has, you kind of play in this defensive hands the entire time where he can be creative who he drops. You're going to see a DN drop randomly. You're going to feel comfortable at moments too where, the first drive, Beck throws 6 passes of 8 yards to Higgins and Noel on the route and the exact guy he wanted to target. But you got to do that 30 times. And you got to do it probably 5 or 6 times in big moments. And that's where it's come down to. I don't see them scoring more than 16 points. And that's a good game from them. That's probably going for 300 yards total, 350. But this is not a red zone scheme.
That's no picks, that's no fumbles.
They don't have an offensive line to perform in the red zone. They don't have a running quarterback. You're not going to run Beck. Beck will scramble. He'll pick up 3rd and 5s, but he's not going to be a guy that they're going to option read more than once a game. They don't want to put him in space and get hit. He's not a big guy. So if you don't have all these natural advantages to beating our defense, which I don't think they have any, truly, they have skill and they execute well and they're a smart team, but they don't have the core elements you need to beat Iowa.
You need to push a button.
You're not pushing buttons.
Yeah.
So if you're not pushing buttons, you got to execute like no other.
Well, I think this is a good time to bring in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So Kinnick, the advantage of playing at home is pretty obvious. When third down comes around, even first, second, a lot of these big games, you're not getting a clean snap count from the QB. That means you have a delayed motion from the offense, and the D-line has a subtle advantage in pass rushing downs, especially those really loud third down sets in the south end zone are going to be insane this game. If what you say is true, where they're not going to be successful in the run game, we're not going to be worried about them backing us up with a deep ball. That looks like 3rd and 6,
at least 3rd and 4.
3rd and 4 a lot. And it's Brian Allen getting teed up, getting a full run at Beck. Beck's not a big guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we mentioned earlier in the pod about those late developing blitzes. I think they're going to try and hit Beck early, get him thinking. You get hit by Castro or Higgins at full speed in quarter 1. Mm-hmm. That stays in your head the whole day. That means I'm playing ball out offense the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I think that psychological advantage that Iowa carries, whenever they play a team that doesn't scare them over the top, it becomes the most physical game of football they have ever been in their life.
Yeah.
No one in the Big 12 plays like this.
Yeah.
You might see a little bit from like an Oklahoma when they're in their prime, but there isn't another defense in the Big 12 that lines up and puts their face through you that many times.
Yeah.
And you talk about Kinnick getting wild up. Take a little bit of a lead in this game.
Yeah. And we weren't at the game this past Saturday, but from what we heard, it had a buzz to it. And you can feel the momentum in the fan base. You have a clean slate. This is a new program, new opportunity, a lot of skill, good schedule. Massive home game against Iowa State. One play happens. Pick, 70-yard touchdown pass, good drive to start the game, go up 7-0. It's a powder keg. This is 2021 Penn State, 28-17 Ohio State. There's a moment where if you're in a rivalry game and you feel like you have a good team and it's kind of this new era of Iowa football.
We score points now.
This place could explode. And that's the reality of this game. It's either going to be a really close win for Iowa State where Beck has to play out of his mind the entire time. He's going to be 70% completion and basically play at an NFL level of accuracy. That's going to be the requirement. That's what he has to do. Or Kinnick roars the entire day. And you're just on the back foot. And you can't believe how loud it is. And Iowa's playing with so much emotion and so much hype that there's a point where you can maybe, rout them.
There's a new belief in this program. If we figure out how to have a top 50 to 40 offense and still be conservative, not be a ground and pound, control the clock team, limit mistakes, all that, typical pro style football. If you can add in a moderately explosive offense where you can start recruiting skill players at a high level, there's a new Iowa that could be on the frontier where we're now moving into this top 15 to top 12 team routinely, and you're starting to really bark at the bigger programs.
Yeah, it's where Wisconsin has lived in the 2010s, during the Bielema era. It's where Oklahoma State lives with their best teams. It's where Utah lives with their best teams. It's like all those like programs. When they're the best, they have a team that can score 30 points on offense. Those are always defensively good teams. But if Iowa can kind of start creeping up from, we were at 16, 17 last year, you creep up to 27, and now you're, maybe in 2 years, you're 30 pretty much every year. You go from 18th best team in the country every year based on your defense, where you're starting to sit at 12, and you're in that playoff discussion every year. And I think the Iowa fan base understands it. Like, we have a defensive recruiting base and a coaching staff retention and just a lot of really talented people on our staff on defense. And if it can build out the same way offensively as like everyone's kind of wanted it to, like, you can see this holistic program that it's pro style with smart college decisions on defense and, recruiting the right personnel on offense. It could be a different program. And this is a starting point. It's the first year. And it all comes down to Iowa fans are going to put it on this game. If you win convincingly, you win 23-13, you maybe put up 30 against a good Iowa State defense, like, it could bubble. Or it could kind of start rolling. And I think that's what the Kinnick's going to be this weekend.
Yeah, it feels a lot like not to jinx it, feels a lot like pre-Michigan in 2019 when you had those really explosive early games against Iowa State, Middle Tennessee State. I think we had like 687 yards, something like that.
Yeah,
we're rolling into Michigan and Doctman and Morehouse are projecting like 10-point wins.
Yeah, 2002 Iowa is like the kind of the feeling to the team.
I just feel so good about the QB though.
Yeah.
Like, Cade showed what he was. A lot of people, forsake Cade in the offseason. A lot of people thought like, oh, we can't trust him because of injury. He wasn't that good when he played. He's always just benefited from his time at Michigan for being around talented players. We saw something, different in that. We saw that, this is actually like a confident, highly talented QB in small ways. And he showed all of that in one game. I'm really excited to see where he can take off to. I think the development of his story, especially, we talk about this on the recruiting trail again. You can see other really talented QBs can see themselves in this narrative where you're playing pro style and, the 49ers and all those teams that run under center football. You don't have to be this super athlete. You just got to play QB. The other guys can start seeing them in that position. We could start recruiting receivers and QBs in a year from now. We talked about like, we're putting ourselves in a 4 to 5 year hole from what we've seen from the receiver room where we've lost all of our talent. Our QB recruiting is probably, you go through the list, there's 7 or 8 in a row that you list. You're like, how is this possible? That could all flip in 1 year with the transfer portal and all that. So this is the most excited I've been as an Iowa football fan, I think, since 2018. I think when we beat the crap out of Minnesota and Indiana in consecutive
beat Maryland
weeks.
too. Yeah.
And you saw like the next year coming out. I think that's another point where I was like, man, what's it going to be? I think this is even a level higher.
Yeah.
I think the skill on this team, the age of it, just the fan want to. Like, we're just so ready to break out of this, national joke and become something new. And like, we were starting to see it for the first time. You're seeing like positive articles and tweets about the Iowa offense. And if you can capitalize on that momentum and that rebrand, it could be an unbelievable season.
Yeah.
Well, let's move into picks because I think I'm going to be a little cocky about this one.
Yeah. Let's do our prediction.
Yeah. So the line is 2.5 to 3.
Yeah.
Saw one at 3.5. The over-under is 36.5. I'm going to do a sacrilegious thing. I think it's going over. I think Iowa's going to be creative enough and be a second half focused offense team where like we're going to try and establish the run in the first half. But I think Lester didn't show his full package. I think he, played dumb a little bit in the first half, and we saw a really developed, built-out scheme with multiple counters. I don't think he wasted all that for Illinois State. I think he's got a plan for each game, and we might see him do a similar thing where he slow plays it, he baits the hook, he figures out where he's being attacked, and then he really opens up in the second half. But when I think he does, I think we're going to have a real chance to be explosive again. I think we're going to have a real chance of being a highly efficient 3 or 4 touchdown half. I'm going to predict a 38-13 win. I think it's going to be a Kinnick riot. I think their offense is going to just be immediately under pressure. We're going to line up in our very basic off coverage. I don't think they're going to really press the buttons early. And if Phil is in that mode where he can start getting a little more aggressive because he's not worried about you going over the top, you're going to see multiple turnovers. You're going to see multiple sacks. That Kinnick environment's going to really ramp up. This is obviously, I'm talking about like a 20-point difference spread, but I feel like this is the moment where we kind of flip it finally back on Iowa State. Like, this is not a talented Iowa State team. We have the talent to beat the crap out of them. Let's go out and do it.
I think that's what it comes down to. It's just when you evaluate who flashes on their squad. If you break it down just by, if you had to draft the top 15 players in this game, how many of those top 15 would be Iowa players? I think it would be 10 minimum. It could be 12.
It's probably Higgins.
There is legitimate. You could argue for 12. I think Higgins for them.
Brahmer's probably up there in top 15.
Brahmer's
player.
probably there. And then maybe you stick Becht up there just because he's been an efficient guy. And Noel. So I'd say those 4. But no, like Cooper on their defense, like he's good. Want to play for Iowa. And that's probably it. And that's where this game lies. It's like their defense is not, like it doesn't flash. They played Memphis last year in the bowl game and got routed with the same personnel. Memphis, like, looked like they put like 500 yards nearly. The entire game, they looked comfortable and like looked faster than them. It's the same defense. And we can't predicate this based on the past Iowa State defenses. It's not. I still think it's a rivalry game. I'm not going to go 38-13. I still think it's going to be a little herky-jerky because we're still breaking in a new offensive game plan. And we're not – Lester hasn't had to play a lot of 3-3-5s in his life, I'm guessing. It's not a consistent scheme he sees. So – and going into Becht. I think Becht and Noel and Higgins are so synced up and really know what they want every game, every single drive and play. They will move the ball between the 20s. And we'll say this again, and we can try to highlight this as much as possible. The play of this game, which will decide if Iowa wins or not, is Higgins' 20-yard to 30-yard fade deep shots out of a 2-second count. So Becht's going to get it for 2 seconds, and he's going to make it a 2-on-1 game. 19 of the players on the field aren't going to matter, and that's what Iowa State wants because their personnel is worse. But if you can make it a quarterback, a receiver, and a DB game, and that's what they did in 2022, they can possibly score 20 points by having 2 massive bombs or drawing a few PIs. So that will be the aspect I'm looking for the most. And when those throws come, I will lean forward and I go, here it is. We got to stop it.
Yep.
Because that's what the game will come down to. Because I don't see them having success unless they're super gadgety in ways I'm not seeing.
I think that pressure from the defense is going to be overwhelming. Yeah. I think you're going to see them a little wide-eyed. Like Beck's going to walk out there and go, man, we just handed the ball off on a 5 or 6 and it went for 2. Like, fuck. Like, what do we do now?
Yeah. So I'm going to be a little less, like, I think we'll control the game just because you're at home, massive game, better personnel. I'm going to go 23-13. I think we'll take the lead late in the second quarter. Any way we do that, he's at 10-3 or something like that. And then late in the third quarter where our run game starts to really kick in. And I think our defense just starts to all right, we know exactly how we're going to attack you. We take that 2-score lead and we hold on. And that's where I see this game going.
Awesome. I'm so excited. This got me more amped up for the game.
It's just a huge game for the like you look at Iowa's schedule. There's not a lot of big ones. This is one of them, and you get them at home, and you have an opportunity to set the tone for the year. And this is a tone-setting game every year for both teams. So it's really exciting. I think it's time to get into roll through our picks quickly. I think
I did my picks already. Those are the 2. I'm not picking outside the Iowa game.
There's Iowa
over 36.5 and Iowa minus 2.5.
I will be doing Iowa minus 2.5 as well, and I will be doing Michigan +7 against Texas. I just like the opportunity to get a team that still got swagger. Michigan, they didn't play well against Fresno State. Everyone's going to sell, everything on them. I think the line moved instantly for Texas' way. Give me Mason Graham. Give me Will Johnson at home in a crazy environment against a Texas team that truly,
hasn't shown up against
they
lost to a Washington team
won Alabama.
Yeah.
And that's been their crescendo of their program. Ewers against Oklahoma last year, when they got a big game, he threw horrible picks. He makes bad decisions under pressure. It's going to be a madhouse in that, you're 7-point dogs and you're defending national champions. You can't sell more bulletin board material to a fan base or a program more than that. So just give me the Michigan +7.
Yeah, I'll take this time to brag about my last week's picks. The Northwestern, Miami, Ohio was at a 39. I bet it on a 42.5. It got to 26 points.
Yeah.
Notre Dame, shout out to Ben Keating.
Mm-hmm.
We had them +3, ended up winning by 10.
Yeah.
So
I had the under in that game. I went 1-1. LSU, I was right about Nussmeier and Lacey. Dogs, going to be dogs all year. I was wrong I didn't know USC's personnel. USC had some real receivers. I knew LSU's defense wasn't great. I did not expect USC to have 3 or 4 6'4" receivers that can make plays, and that was really surprising to me. I think LSU still covered. I think they got outcoached in the third and fourth quarter when they started to have momentum, but I think I'm excited to watch him. I'll be betting on LSU the rest of the year. Nussmeier can really play. Awesome. I'm still about that. So
all right, well, go Hawks.
Go Hawks. Also, shout out to Theo Rayner Frederick, my son. It's our first boy in our family. He's going to be a week old when this episode drops. Clearly a good luck charm. All he knows is 40-point games and shutouts, and he's 1-0 so far. Also, shout out to my wife. Kelly, she labored for over 20 hours to bring Theo to us. So it's a really long week. And honestly, like looking forward to this podcast has been great, and looking forward to this part of our lives that we've developed has been awesome, and the fan base that we've developed. And I still want to do this on a weekly basis, and that was kind of like a great takeaway to have. You have a son that you can kind of introduce to the game, and as well as, prepare for a podcast at 3 a.m. when you're watching them. It's been a great experience. So shout out to my family, and
get him on the recruiting board.
Yep.
It's not our side. It's the other side that's got the real James.
2043. Look out for Theo Frederick. He'll be playing for Seth Wallace in a few years.